Hi there everyone and welcome back to Afrodo Reviews. And on this channel I help you decide, is that book worth reading over a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Let's decide. We need to have a talk. Today's book is Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters.
Percy Jackson, Sea of Monsters.
Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters is the sequel book to The Lightning Thief, a book which I reviewed over 2 years ago now. In any case, this book was published on April 1st of 2006 and won a variety of awards, including, but not limited to, the Barnes & Noble Best of 2006 for Kids and Teens, the 2009 Mark Twain Award with its predecessor, The Lightning Thief, having won the previous year, and the 2007 Young Adult Library Services Association Best Book for Young Adults. Now, most of what I mentioned about the background of The Lightning Thief does still apply here as well, but to be clear, this book did also receive an adaptation to the big screen in 2013. But it was awful and butchered the source material. It took it into an alley and stabbed it to death and then came out wearing its face saying, "Guys, look, I'm more your best friend." That being said, the much better received adaptation, the Disney Plus series, the second season is confirmed to be this book, and it's currently in production as we speak, as far as I know. I know it was recently approved for a second season. Apart from that, it did in fact receive a graphic novel adaptation in June of 2013, much like the ones before and after it. Much like the one before it and the one after it, I guess I should say. But enough with the backstory. Let's get on with the ratings. And then we move on to the cover. Now, I have one of the newer covers right now, where a piece of the spine is meant to form into a giant mosaic when all the books are put together. When I first read the book, though, I was actually reading off the original cover art, because, at the time, the Battle of the Labyrinth had literally just come out when I discovered this series. Actually, not even literally just come out. It would, it came out after I finished going backwards in the series. Because if you guys don't remember, I mentioned in my first video that this is one of those two series that I ended up reading backwards. I started with the Titan's Curse and I read backwards to the Lightning Thief. Not on purpose, but, as a kid, I didn't know the Titan's Curse was the third one. I didn't find that out until after I read it. And then I saw Sea of Monsters on the shelf. Ironically, Sea of Monsters, no matter which way I take it, was the second book I read. So, the original cover is honestly the one I would have preferred to own. Not necessarily because I think it's much better, but mostly because all of my other books are the original cover of the series, so this one kind of stands out quite a bit. Now, the original is interesting in a lot of ways, personally, too. What with the giant hovering eye, that rickety rope bridge, and that ship in the background. I liked it a little more over the one I currently have, because it's a bit more subtle, but also more visually appealing. It gives a sense of foreboding, and you stare at this wondering what the dangers are. Each piece of the cover has something to do with the quest, and if you're well versed enough in Greek mythology, you also sort of realize right away the elements it's using to inspire itself. But still works even if you aren't, because it takes elements from the story itself. Now, that's not to say the new cover is bad. It really isn't. In fact, I think it's quite good. But it does get rid of some of that more subtle stuff. Instead of just one giant ominous eye staring at you, you get a clear shot of our Cyclopean enemy, so we're under no delusion on what we'll be fighting. Also, instead of the Queen Anne's Revenge in the background, which vaguely brings to mind the Argo, which is the story is based largely on the Jason and the Argonauts. The new cover opts to use the Clarissa's CSS Brigham, a Confederate ironclad warship her father gifts her for this quest. Now, like I was saying, in this case, both options are great. The Birmingham is more relevant to the current story, while I like the Queen Anne's Revenge as more clearly invoking the Greek myth that inspired this story. I will say that the only element of this newer cover that I don't think works well is the Hydra. At least I'm assuming this guy right here is the Hydra, and not Cilia. Her. Because Percy is in the middle of chopping a head off. The reason I think this is a bad choice is because it's such a minor point in the book, and the Hydra scene is almost there more to introduce a concept of the magic and the world than because it holds a strong relevance to the story itself. But let's go ahead and move on to the synopsis. Now, for those of you who just love to see how the book presents itself, please check out my TBR for this month. This will be the last month This will be the last day that you can do it before I make a new TBR in, well, I guess 2 days. So I guess technically you got 2 days to do this for the coming month. And if you know my channel, you know what the coming month is going to be. But for now, let's give a quick contextual synopsis so y'all know where I'm coming from. When we last left Percy Jackson, he had just recovered the Master Bolt for Zeus, rescued his mother from the clutches of Hades, and got a chance to live a normal life. Well, as normal as a demigod could ever live. This has resulted in him going to a new school, making friends with one of the biggest kids on the block named Tyson, who, despite his massive size and strength, is nothing more than a giant teddy bear. However, when cannibalistic giants attack him in a game of dodgeball gone very, very wrong, Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson, who is revealed to be his Cyclopean half-brother, have to flee to Camp Half-Blood. Upon arriving, they find that the barriers have been falling, and Luke, the demigod son of Hermes, who turned to Kronos last year and almost killed, or I guess unalived, Percy, poisoned Thalia's tree. Now, it's up to Percy and his friends to sail into the Sea of Monsters and recover the Golden Fleece, the only thing that can save Thalia's tree before it's too late. Along the way, maybe they should also rescue Grover, who's been kidnapped by a Cyclops, who thinks that Grover's gonna be his new Cyclopean bride. Now onto the review. Those of you who watched my very first Nostalgia Month back when I started this channel, you know that I have a very fond history with this specific series. Percy Jackson and the Olympians was one of my all-time favorite book series, starting from middle school and going deep into high school. And I did my best to be an active part of the fandom. It's one of the few books that I was actually part of the fandom as it was coming out. I was even one of the first in line to get the follow-up series book, Son of Neptune, book at my local Barnes & Noble. I had pre-ordered that book. But when I reread the first book, though I still really loved it, I did admit that the prose was clearly aimed at a much younger audience, which did make it come off a bit more simplistic. And the story itself had times where it just felt like Riordan, I guess is how you're supposed to say his name. Riordan was just introducing set piece after set piece, which I did explain. Yeah, of course that made sense. This is all based on stories that he told his kid. So he's not telling his kid these giant stories with the intention of stringing them together. He's telling these stories, piece by piece. So despite it all, it was still a great nostalgic read, and I was very glad that I revisited it. So, can I say the same about Sea of Monsters?
Give me a hell yeah! What?
Honestly, Sea of Monsters is what a sequel should be, an improvement from the original book in almost every way. The stakes are a little more personal, as we need to rescue both Grover, Percy's friend from his previous adventure, and Thalia's tree. Not only the focal point of the magic that protects Camp Half-Blood from the monsters, but also an important landmark to Annabeth herself. We get more characterization for the more one-note characters of the previous book, like Clarice, and the quest itself is a lot more focused. It doesn't feel like our characters are just going from this to this to this because Riordan wants to introduce cool concepts. For the most part. Like I mentioned last time, the quest for the Master Bolt was nice, and it was great to see a number of the ways Riordan could imagine the ancient Greek myth integrating itself into modern society. But at times, it did feel like our characters were wandering just from place to place so he could do this. Things felt a little too disconnected to work. And as I said, this book handles it a lot better. Since the book clearly takes inspiration from Jason and the Argonauts in telling its story, it visits a lot of the locations you would expect to see along that kind of path. Now, that's not to say that the book doesn't still do it in a couple of these places, like for specifically the Monster Donuts franchise. This feels like Riordan just included it because he had the admittedly interesting idea of how monsters tie their life force to capitalistic franchises, and when you fight something like the Hydra and cut off one of its heads, thus causing it to go 2 more back, you can cause a new franchise location to pop up somewhere in the country where the Hydra, every time the Hydra goes a new head, oh, there's a new Monster Donut somewhere. I will say that it also clearly is aimed at a younger audience, so you do have a couple obvious fake outs here and there. Riordan definitely commits a bit more to it than you would see in most of these kind of books. Hell, even the adaptation itself committed to the fake out that it was that it vaguely took from this book for about 10 minutes before just saying, psych. That being said, it really is just a better book. This is one of those books that I actually have a hard time talking about because for the most part I only have good things to say about it. And I have so many good things to say about it that I just want to tell you, go read it, because this is such a good book, I think you should read it. But since I can't just keep gushing about the several plot points of this book, because in a way I'm also just spoiling it. And I want you to read it for the first time by yourself. I've already spoiled more than I want to spoil about this book. I do personally love the fact that we do get clear looks at that not every Olympian parent is as nice as our heroes. Poseidon, for as neglectful as he can seem at times, is very much still tries his best by Olympian standards to be a good dad. And we also see at points where, the same thing applies to Athena, who at points is trying to be a good parent. And the same with Hermes, who even beseeches our heroes in this book, hey, can you try to get to my son? I don't want to see him doing what he does. But I can't get personally involved because I'm a god.
You're...
Hermes. Little insulted you didn't recognize me. My feelings might have even been hurt. I wasn't such a self-confident individual. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm killing these shorts.
I do also, so when it shows Clarice's relationship to her father, who we met in the last book as, the big giant bully, we also realize that, yeah, he is exactly that kind of person to his children as well. Honestly, I thought it would have been nice that if Percy had connected the parallels from Smelly Gabe in the previous book to this one, he would have understood that, yeah, Iris is pretty much just a much buffer version of Smelly Gabe. But that being said, it also, I will say the prophecy of this book isn't as interesting. I do know that that's my favorite part of almost every other book in this series, is the prophecy and seeing how it slowly comes together and you realize what's going on. It's like, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. The prophecy of this book isn't given to our heroes, but that's because Clarice is supposed to be the main hero, and they kind of set off on their own quest. And the twist of what the prophecy says is sort of but that's also mostly because we don't get it until they've figured out what the twist of the prophecy is. But overall, yeah, I don't have much else to say. This is a really good book. I highly recommend you go read it. You know what? I am forgetting something very important about this book. So I mentioned in my TBR that one of the things about this book that happens that was fair for its time, but then over time became much more scrutinized, was the fact that Tyson was called the R word a lot. And I don't really know how to say it, like to euphemize it in a way that makes it not as offensive anymore, like I can do with a lot of these words. But yeah, he was basically called that. And for the time it was released, that's actually not too uncommon. I definitely remember that as a kid, that word was just kind of thrown out, and yeah, it's really not something that you thought about as a kid. That was just the latest insult. Like, when you used to call people, hey, you're gay. That's one of those. It was fair for its day. So going back, I wanted to see how bad it actually was. And I want to say that I still don't get the main problem with this. Because it's not like Percy is throwing around this word. It's not like our heroes are throwing around this word. Trust me, in the coming review I'm going to talk about, you're really going to see how bad this kind of language can get from what is supposed to be our hero. But no, I want to say with this book, then again, this might be a newer book. I wasn't able to find the original, so fair. I will say this is from the perspective of this one. But Tyson is called the R word, but he is called that by who is supposed to be a bully in this book. You're not supposed to see that character as right. And I guess maybe you can point to maybe Percy being ashamed to be related to Tyson as maybe seeing it that way, but the book itself is more like Percy feels his dad's making fun of him because he claimed what's a monster in his society as his son a lot faster than he ever claimed Percy to be his son. And, it's kind of one of those scenarios. So, I do want to say that. I do think this book aged fine. I don't actually think that part of the book was really too bad. But mind you, that, again, is also coming from the perspective of reading a newer edition. So, I don't know if a lot more of the usage of the word was, edited out over time. But, yeah. So, with that being said, yeah, 8 out of 10. It's a pretty good book. So yeah, this is a good book. It held up. I think it held up a lot better than Lightning Thief did. But the Lightning Thief, first novel in the series, it still kind of amuses me that this was the Percy Jackson series actually wasn't Riordan's first book series. I still need to dig up his original book series and read that, because now I'm super invested in finding that out. That is, but overall, there's really not much else to say about this book series. Well, at least this book in specific. I had a lot to say about the series, but, it's mostly just me. Oh, it's so great! Yeah, sorry, if you can tell, this one's a lot more unscripted than before. But, yeah, with that being said, I don't really have much else to say. I do highly recommend this book. Not even going to pretend it goes into Mount Doom, or should I say the pits of Tartarus. But, Tartarus. I almost said it like that, by the way. But yeah, with that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.